My name is Lorili, and this is my life story. I was born in Pell City, Alabama, to my dad and mother, and then for 3 years they lived and they got a divorce. We moved to Florida, and we lived there pretty much till I was 12 years old. My brother and I, my real brother and I, we saw my mom. She would come maybe every once 2 or 3 months, and we were only allowed to stay with her for a weekend. And the whole situation with, you have a stepmom and a real dad, and I know there's a lot of people out there that come from broken families, and they know exactly what I'm talking about. It is hard. It's a lot of baggage that you do carry in divorce, and it hurts. And you really have to be strong, I think, to make it through situations like that. But anyway, so I would have to say from the time I was 8 years old till I was 16, that I was sexually abused. And when we left Florida, we moved up here when I was 12, and it still carried on. And I met my sweetheart in high school. We went to 2 separate schools, but I met him when I was 15. And then he joined the Marines and he left, and I stayed here for a while. And when he would come back home from his schooling, he proposed to me when I was 17, asked me to marry him. When I said yes and we got married, he sent for me and I flew out to California, and I stayed out there. He was in the Marines for 3.5 more years, and we stayed out there. And I would have to say that when I was out there, it was like a whole new world for me. I grew up at home, like I said, it was very strict. We weren't allowed to do hardly nothing, there was not a whole lot of freedom. So when I married Terry and he sent for me and I was out there, it was just, oh wow, it was like a kid in a candy store all over for me, experiencing things that I had never seen or done, and I loved my husband at that time, and I still do, but I don't know, the best way to say it is I kind of went wild, pretty much is what I did. For me, there was just so much entertainment, there was so much stuff, and I had the wrong friends that were doing the wrong things. And I started going out on the weekends, and we would go to clubs and do different things and so forth. And I remember one night we went out with some girls, and my husband wasn't there, and we had went to Tijuana, which is in Mexico, and we were pretty much partying. And I would have to say, and this is something that I'm not proud of, and it's hard to speak of. And you got to understand, and I forgot to say that I was saved. I got saved when I was 13, and I know I was saved because I remember there was a change in my life. I remember it, but pretty much backslidden. Nobody in my family lived for the Lord. It was so easy to just go back to the world because it wasn't taught in our home. I just kind of had it. It just repetitiously started happening. Every other weekend we would go out with the same people, same girls, same place, and it just got worse and worse. And then finally, I remember one night I was laying on our bed at night in our apartment, and I remember waking up, and I looked over at my husband, and he had been awake, and he was staring at me. And he was just sobbing uncontrollably, but he was quiet, but he was just sobbing. And I remember looking at him, and I asked him, I was like, what are you doing? And he just said, I love you. I can't believe you're hurting me like this. And at this time, I know I've skipped a whole lot, but at this time we had my son. He was just a little bitty kid. He was about 1.5 years old. And Terry just wanted out. He wanted to save what little bit of hope and shred that he could of his family. So he got out, and we came back home, and I was probably 20, maybe at that time. And when I did, we came back here to North Carolina. I moved in with my parents, and I was pregnant too at the time with Boone, my second son. And when Boone probably was about 3 weeks old, I want to say, I went through what a lot of women do, postpartum depression. And I remember talking to my husband, and I was like, look, I gotta get away from here. I can't take this. I don't want to be part of this. I want my freedom. I don't want any of this. I don't want our marriage. I don't want none of it. I want to go back to California. I want my freedom. And I moved back to California, and at that time, I would go from apartment to apartment, house to house, wherever I could find a place to sleep. That's where I would stay. Pretty much all my stuff was in one suitcase and one bag. And I remember being out there, and I guess the lowest I got was when I had nowhere to stay and I had to sleep on the streets. That is when I realized that I had to go home, because that was no life for me. I didn't want to do some of the things that some of the girls were doing. I didn't want my life to be like that. So I called my parents. I called Terry, of course, and I begged them to send me some money so I could take a bus back home. And when I got home, it was really hard, because at that time, our children were calling my mother their mom, and it was only fair because I wasn't in their life at that time. And it was hard to transition back in. I had already hurt Terry. He was so numb to everything. He didn't know whether to trust me, to believe me, or anything. And I don't blame him. So it took a lot. For Terry to finally somewhat let me back in his life and in the children's life. And then over the time period of years, that's when I started abusing more medicine, because I still, at this point, I had all of this baggage from all the past, and I had never dealt with it. And I just kept burying it and burying it and burying it. And then after 22 years, it finally started rearing its head, and I abused medicine, abused drugs to numb all of this from all these years, that it drove me to do terrible things that I don't want to really get into, but to feed my habit, the things that I had to do to get them. And then I had gotten pregnant with Maddie at this time, and I decided that was it. I had to quit taking drugs and so forth, because I didn't want anything to happen to my baby. And so I stopped, and I had Maddie, and we moved over to Hiddenite, and at this time we lived again with Terry's grandma and grandpa. And so I went to church with Granny, and I remember one afternoon, I do not remember exactly what the preacher was preaching, but I know it was on a salvation, just coming back, getting forgiveness. And I remember just feeling the guilt and just all of that load on me. And I remember I had to get up, and I didn't care who was in my way. And I remember getting up, and I remember going to the altar. And at that time, I had just so much, I couldn't even speak. All I could do was cry. And I know that the Lord understands and understood my tears, and I knew He knew what I was going to that altar for. And I will tell you, it felt so wonderful to be able to go to the cross and to just unload all of my shame. And the fact that He would take me back was amazing, because everything that I did, I didn't deserve it. But He loves me enough, and He loves you enough, that He'll take you back no matter what happens. I can say now that all 3 of our kids are saved because I've held in there and I've held true to the Lord. And I know that, there's been rocky times. I know that, I have fallen, but I got back up, the dust off my feet, and I kept going. And no matter what, I'm going to keep going. Even if, like our preacher says, we have to crawl in, we crawl in. And the Lord mended mine and my husband's marriage. And my husband saw that I was for real this time. And through me being faithful and just doing the things that I'm supposed to do, he saw that I was sincere. And now I am very happy to say that my husband and I, we have been married for, I want to say 23 years. We've been together for 25, and our boys have joined the Marines. We have one left in school, and I would just like to say that it is so worth sticking in there. No matter, personally, how many times you fall, do not give heed to the devil when he says it's hopeless. Just give up. You're too scarred, you're too nasty, you're too dirty. Don't believe him, because he's a liar. He is so much a liar. Do not believe him. You just keep going. If, like you said, you have to drag yourself in, you do it. And I want to thank the Lord for mending mine and my husband's marriage. And it has been the best since. And I just want to thank everybody for everything.